are letters of recommendation from citizens encouraging the Historical Society to approve that marker so that it can be placed on the wall at the Lodge Community Center. So if you're interested in doing that, there's an instruction sheet back there on the table that has all the instructions. I also included about a page and a half of factual information about Stephen Landrum and what he did. And we see touches of him. He was the first African American to own a building on the Glasgow Square. Unfortunately, they tore it down. But we have the limestone name off the top of the building, and it's now the bench that's under the entrance canopy out there for the Thomas building. But he did a lot of unique things in this whole area, and I feel like that would be a worthy project. So if you're interested in that, you could just pick that up. To the program, Jackie Wheat is with us from Mammoth Cave National Park, and of course we always enjoy programs from Mammoth Cave. We are so blessed to have this resource right in our back door, and hopefully everyone is taking advantage of that. Jackie, if you'd like to go ahead and give your program, we're anxious to hear it.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I do want to thank everyone. I thank the Historical Society for asking us to come out and present this program. I'll say this at the very beginning because most of you probably don't know me. This summer will be 27 years that I've been at Mammoth Cave, so I am a caveman, and currently living in Smiths Grove, but my grandparents and great-grandparents are all from the Fountain Run area, all around Barren River Lake area. And when we're tasked with doing programs each summer for the campers and visitors, they don't tell us what program to come up with. They tell us, what are you interested in? What do you want to talk about? And this was one of the programs that I definitely wanted to do. Before I started working at Mammoth Cave, I actually went up to Horse Cave and did an internship at Hidden River Cave when I was in college. And one of my friends that I guided tours with was Jeremy Collins, their son, right here up front. But so we got to be real good friends, and that kind of got me learning more about Floyd Collins. It got me even more interested in wanting to go caving and exploring, and it basically has just continued to be a career for me. So I just feel very blessed with that. So thank you for letting me come here and present this program. I titled this program, Floyd Collins, Greatest Cave Explorer Ever Known. And the reason I titled it that, Greatest Cave Explorer Ever Known, one reason is because it's actually on his tombstone. Greatest Cave Explorer Ever Known.
Wow.
And also, in that same cemetery, on another tombstone, somebody has written, friend of Floyd Collins. You just don't see that very much on tombstones. They don't say, hey, I was a friend of so-and-so. So Floyd was making an impact, and we're going to talk about that impact. And maybe by the end of the program, we'll see if you agree with that statement.
It's interesting you got that.
So, Floyd Collins, he was born in 1887. His dad was born in Logan County, but Floyd was born in what is now part of Mammoth Cave National Park. He lived about 4 miles away from where the entrance to Mammoth Cave is. Lived in a little house. I'll show you a photo of that in just a moment. But he was the third child out of 8. So they had a pretty good sized family, and that was typical back then. This is his father, Lee Collins. And Floyd, he dropped out of school early to kind of help with chores and farm work. Dropped out. He went to school till he was in 4th grade. but he did go back to school when he was an adult. Once at 23 years old, another time when he was 36. When he was 23, there's a photo of the school. Floyd is over here in this back corner. He's attending night school. The school would have been just adjacent to the Mammoth Cave Baptist Church, which is still, this is a photo of it today. It still stands in the park. The school building doesn't. A lot of the buildings don't, but this is still here. This building still exists in the park, and this is his house. This is where the family grew up. This is where Floyd grew up as a child. Doesn't look like a very big house, does it? When you say 8 children and everybody. This is a photo of the Mammoth Cave Hotel at that same time period that Floyd's growing up. And the reason I wanted to put this in is because there's stories that Floyd's dad, Lee, would go to the hotel and sell eggs. And Floyd would tag along as a kid, and he would go down to the cave entrance, and he would see where people had set up souvenir shops to sell trinkets and souvenirs and rocks and geodes and stuff like that. And Floyd was learning as a young kid, the cave brought money. It brought people that were interested in the cave. Floyd also learned that as he's going back and forth, if he could run in a little rock shelter or find a little cave and find a cool rock in it, maybe he could run down to the entrance while his dad's selling eggs. He could run down there and sell a pocket full of rocks and go home with a pocket full of pennies or nickels. And that was big time for young Floyd back then. So that probably piqued his interest early on that, hey, caves are something I might want to get more involved into and learn more about. This is where the Mammoth Cave is, the hotel, the historic entrance, and this is Flint Ridge Road, and the Mammoth Cave Baptist Church, and then Floyd's house. So it was about 4 miles away from Mammoth Cave to Floyd's house. And then you see the Green River, along the banks of the Green River. When Floyd was 10 years old, he learned that caves are also very dangerous. Something my parents remind me of all the time still, and I'm over 50. But when he was 10 years old, story goes that he did go into a cave, and there was a cougar in the mouth of the cave that chased him out. So he learned that he had to be really careful going into caves. Not only could there be animals and such that kind of dangerous, but he also learned that the cave itself could be dangerous. When he was a few years older, as a teenager, they were out. Him and his dad was out doing some farm work, I suppose, and they heard people yelling from across the hillside to go get help. Now what had happened is right down the road was the Bluegrass Country Club back then. And it was in business for several years until it closed, but there was a cave entrance in the back of the country club, and there was a man named Pike Chapman. He was trying to dig a hole and open up this entrance and make it larger, and as he was working inside the cave entrance, rocks began to fall in on him and hit him, and they pulled him out of the cave, and Floyd and his dad and others had to go find doctors and bring over to help this gentleman. But by the time the doctors got there, Pike Chapman had already passed away of his injuries. So not only is Floyd learning, hey, there could be animals in the cave, but also there's danger of getting hurt inside of a cave. But from all the stories we hear, he is just a very determined, very curious young man. The more he goes into caves, the more comfortable he starts feeling exploring caves. And he's learning that it's a whole new world down there that very few people ever get to see, and that just intrigued him. He could go places no other person or no human had ever gone. And sometimes he found some interesting stuff. Sometimes it might be animal bones. Sometimes it could be prehistoric Native American bones. But he began to see stuff in caves that were preserved. So he knew he could find these little time capsules and go into and learn about things. And also he could probably sell them for some money. And that intrigued him as well. Floyd discovers a cave not far from his house. He called it Floyd's Cave. That's the name he come up with it. This is the entrance to Floyd's Cave today. To get into it, here's a photo inside of it. He wanted to open it up and say, hey, if Mammoth Cave can make money, I'm going to discover a cave and ask people to come take tours in my cave. So this was his first attempt. He called it Floyd's Cave, 1910 to 1913. Then he realized, well, not too many people just want to come see that. So he started looking elsewhere. He finds another cave. Oh, by the way, there's an old lantern in Floyd's Cave. Probably one of his old lamps, still preserved. Then he finds another cave, and he comes up with a little bit better name, Natural Tunnel. And this is a big cave. It's a big passageway. But if you're at the entrance to the cave, you're pretty much looking at the back of the cave too. That's it. That's the whole cave. So he's finding caves, but he's not really finding something that's going to compete with Diamond Caverns and Mammoth Cave and a bunch of the other caves that people are starting to open up in this area. He wanted to be part of it, but he was having trouble finding something that would stand out and be special. Eventually, a gentleman moves down from New York. He moves into this area. His name is Edmund Turner. Edmund Turner has a background in geology and engineering, and he becomes fascinated with the cave region, and he wants to learn all he can learn about caves. And when he starts asking around, hey, who can help me go to caves and explore them and see the caves in this area? And people said, well, you need to go over and talk to Floyd Collins. And so he meets Floyd. They strike up a deal. He starts paying him a couple of dollars a week to take him caving. So now Floyd's getting money for doing something he's going to be doing anyway. And you've also now got the local practical man that knows everybody, that knows the lay of the land, that's been caving since he was 10 years old. And now he's caving with somebody that has a background in geology that can even teach him more about hydrology and water flow and stalactites and the makeup of the cave system too. So now they're working as a pretty good team together and teaching each other. One of the caves that they actually discovered together is actually operated, and we give tours in it in the park today. Y'all have heard of Great Onyx Cave? So Edmund Turner is the one that discovered Great Onyx Cave, but if you start researching that story, you find out that it was him and Floyd together that discovered it. Here's a photo of the Collins family sitting around the house, probably in the afternoon, just cooling off under the shade tree. Floyd is over here, far end, wearing the hat. You do see lanterns. Say he's thinking about caves, probably. But you see Lee Collins sitting in the chair, and lots of family. Again, he had lots of siblings, sisters and stuff, so they're all just kind of sitting around. I like the little kid in the middle just grinning at everybody. A few other things about Floyd Collins that we have found out. He did go work for the Bluegrass Country Club a little bit. They hired him later on to reopen that Pike Chapman entrance, now that they called it. And him and his brothers actually reopened it successfully, and the country club was actually operating cave tours for a while. And the Pike Chapman entrance was actually a back door to Salt's Cave, if you've ever heard of Salt's Cave, which is part of the Mammoth Cave system we know today. They said he surprised everybody with how good of a golfer he was. There was a golf course there, and Floyd did play a little bit, they said, and how good he was at swinging a baseball bat, chopping wood, swinging an axe. So that kind of tells us that he was athletic, that he had the stamina to. If he's a cave explorer, you've got to have some sort of strength and grit and determination as well. As he grows, his reputation grows as the guy to go talk to about caves. And pretty soon geologists start moving into this area to study Mammoth Cave and the other caves in the cave region area. And they started having organized expeditions where they would go in the cave, maybe spend 2 or 3 days, camp out in these caves and study the geology, the hydrology, any kind of artifacts they might find. And they were hiring Floyd to lead these expeditions. This is Floyd with the arrow over his head, and this is called the Neville Party. Mr. Neville was a geologist hired to come explore the geology of the cave region. So Floyd was kind of leading that expedition. And this is in Salt's Cave also. If you go deep into Salt's Cave, there's actually a big rock in the middle of a large tunnel with all of their names scratched on it,
Wow.
where they stayed overnight in the cave. Now here's a few of the other caves that Floyd either helped explore, maybe he discovered them, maybe he was just hired to go check them out. And we know that there was probably countless other caves that he had crawled into, but these are some of the ones that, some of those names you may recognize in this area. Hidden River Cave, which is Horse Cave. The owner hired Floyd to explore it, and Floyd went in it, we know, one time, and there was a story of Floyd getting way deep in the cave, crawling through this nasty muddy passageway, and he smelled something really bad. As he crawled a little bit further, he saw a person that was deceased. They said he was in a suit, and he had a lantern that was broken right next to him. And Floyd got out of that cave. They said when he came out of the cave, you could still smell that smell on his clothes. And he told the owner, Mr. Thomas at the time, that he wasn't going to go back into Hidden River Cave. So there's one of those stories. And I don't blame him for telling him that. Probably the biggest discovery Floyd made cave-wise was actually on his own family's farm, not far from his house. This rock is at the entrance to the cave. It's still there today, and you can barely make out what it says, but it actually says Great Crystal Cave, discovered by Floyd Collins, and it's got a date on here. I believe it's December of 1917. But you can see his name written pretty well at the bottom. So finally, he has found a cave that is very promising. It seems to be big, it's beautiful, it seems to have gypsum crystals in it, big passageways, stalactites, even helictites, which they don't just hang down, they kind of curve out. He starts excavating a bigger entrance. It was a tight crawlway to get in it. Basically, he was trapping some animals, and a possum or a pack rat or something had drugged the trap down into a hole, and he had to crawl down into this little hole to retrieve the traps. and felt air blowing out. So he started moving rocks and crawling deeper and moving rocks and crawling deeper. And that's how he discovered this cave. Here he's excavating a huge entrance. He built a staircase, a rock wall. He's making this tourist friendly because he's trying to develop it to be a commercial success. This is kind of what the entrance looks like. I won't say today, but in the springtime or the summertime. Last week it was all ice and snow, but it was known for its gypsum flowers. Gypsum is the same thing drywall's made out of, but it's calcium sulfate, salt crystals that grow on the dry walls of the cave. Here's a photo of those helictites. Again, these are rock. It's like stalactites, but they kind of flower out. They're kind of rare, really rare. So he definitely had found something that was very unique and very special and stood out quite a bit. This is probably Floyd. It says Homer here, but this is probably Floyd crawling through the cave with gypsum flowers around him. This photo is in a 1925 book that was published. This is a photo taken in the 1927 or 28, and this is a photo of Floyd's cave, Great Crystal Cave that he named. Big passageway. You can see some people sitting on some rocks down here. I know it's hard to see. He called that passageway the Grand Canyon. Here's another photo, and you see his dad sitting on the floor. Here's what the Grand Canyon looks like today. And you can still see a person standing at the bottom of this. Big, huge passageway. The walls are nice and scalloped out. You can see where the rivers and the water flowed through at one time. I mean, think of a Grand Canyon. You know, the water cuts through it, and it just left this huge passageway. This is Floyd's wheelbarrow. You know, to build trails, to move rocks, to develop this cave and get it ready for people to come. He would build his own tools and work tirelessly. And talking with family and stuff, they'll even tell you stories that Floyd was obsessed. He would take his brothers and his sisters and into the cave, and pretty soon it got to where none of them wanted to go in the cave with Floyd because he wanted to spend all day. He didn't want to come out for supper. It was like, we're tired. We need to come out. And he loved it down there. This is a postcard. Floyd is up here at the top. One of the springs in the cave where, as he took tours through the cave, they would stop, get a drink of water, that fresh cave water. And these are some signs. He tried to get people, hey, you got to turn off the main road and turn down the old windy roads, dirt roads. Now, if it rains, good luck getting down here to me. But he was trying to coax people down to him. Now, these are signs decades later. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But people are still trying to do the same thing that Floyd did. They just kind of increased the size and the scale of the advertising. That green sign is still in our archives, and actually it's on display right now down in Bowling Green at SkyPack. This is a brochure of Crystal Cave. Again, it's showing that Grand Canyon passageway. And I said the house still stands today. This is a picture of what it looks like today. The building to the right was built by Floyd. This is the ticket office to Crystal Cave. So he built this ticket office. I'm going to show you some photos of what it looked like in Floyd's day. I like this photo. All these old cars sitting in front of it. Got a story about this photo. You see the house, you see the ticket office. There's a motorcycle parked next to the ticket office. But you know how motorcycles, some of them have a sidecar that attaches, and you just stick somebody in it and they're along for the ride? That's the sidecar right here. We know whose motorcycle that was. It was a young man that drove down here from Fort Knox to take a tour at Crystal Cave with Floyd. Young man went on to be very well known later on. His name was Charles Lindbergh. So this is a photo where Charles Lindbergh visited Mammoth Cave, Crystal Cave. And here's a picture of Floyd standing on the porch of the ticket office. He's got his hat hung up on some little dowels or knobs hanging here. Now, those big passageways I showed you, Floyd, again, he wants to explore as deep as he can. So he finds lower tunnels that just go deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, he wouldn't really advertise taking tours down there, but if you were willing to stay a few days and pay him some extra money, he would take you on an adventure of a lifetime. There are rumors that he got so deep in the cave, 5 or 6 hours deep, and discovered another huge passageway. It was big, it was long. He talked about this massive tunnel deep in the cave, but evidently nobody ever saw it but Floyd. So it became a mystery. But to get to it, you got to go through stuff like this. Not too many people's willing to do that. I've got a little video. I hope this works, but this shows you how tight some of these passageways could be. The sound's not relevant, but
No way.
I believe I want someone else with that.
anybody start breathing fast watching that?
Yeah.
My wife does. She's claustrophobic. Floyd would go through stuff like that. When you go through that crack, you drop in to that big passageway that Floyd had talked about that they thought didn't exist. But decades later, after Floyd had passed away, they rediscover this passageway with his name written on the wall. This says Floyd Collins, 1921. In a big passageway. This is at the bottom of that tight crack. And that's me in the photo, and that's all sweat. That was one of the hardest trips I've ever been on. But just a big tunnel. It goes over a mile. Just this huge borehole passageway. And we also found Floyd's bean cans. Well, that's his name there too. 1923, Floyd Collins. His bean cans and his little fuel can for his lantern. So we found these in the cave. So people thought they were discovering new stuff, and then they find Floyd's already been there. Wrote his name on the wall. The places that he went. Sometimes he might take a brother with him. Sometimes he's just by himself. But for us to gear up in all the modern equipment that we have today and go as a team, for him to do that with the resources he had back then, he was just, my hat off to him. He was an incredible cave explorer. Now, these stories that I'm telling you, most of these stories come from this guy right here. This was Floyd's brother. This is Homer. This is Obie, the dog. I've even got a story about the dog that Homer told. Homer said that he got this dog, but that dog loved Floyd. In fact, it loved Floyd more than Homer. But technically it was Homer's dog, but it kind of adopted Floyd. And the way the story goes, that every time that Floyd would walk down into Crystal Cave to work all day, Obie would follow him down to the entrance and just sit there and wait. And he would wait for Floyd to come out. And when Floyd come out, they'd run back up to the house and he'd feed him. One day, Homer comes home. Floyd's not there. He doesn't see him. He doesn't know where he's at. He goes down to the cave entrance, and there's the dog just sitting, waiting. He's like, okay. Wonder how long Floyd's been down there. So, since the dog was sitting there, Homer says, I better go in and see what's going on. So Homer goes into the cave, gets a little ways in, starts yelling for Floyd. Floyd yells back, bring your light. Mine broke. He had been crawling for hours trying to find his way back out of the cave in the dark. That's a good dog. That dog, basically was telling him, hey, Floyd's still down there. Go help him. This is the book by Homer Collins, The Life and Death of Floyd Collins. And so, notice the title says The Life and Death of Floyd Collins. And if you're familiar with the Floyd Collins story, you're probably a lot more familiar with the end of his life. But again, me presenting this program, I always also want to tell the rest of the story of how Floyd lived and how he grew up and how he got the reputation. But it does have a tragic end. Floyd was a caver. This is what he did all the time. And so if you do something like this constantly, you're probably going to get yourself in more situations that become more dire and more dangerous. Floyd goes into Sand Cave, 1925. Kind of the reason we're telling these stories now is this was 100 years ago this month. February of 1925, Floyd is trapped in Sand Cave. There was a young reporter from Louisville, from the Courier-Journal, and this is a photo of him. His nickname was Skeets because he was tiny as a mosquito, they say. And he was one of the few people small enough to crawl down into the cave and talk to Floyd and try to dig out the rock that had pinned his foot. He had crawled in the Sand Cave, trying to make another big discovery, maybe another cave he could develop commercially. Crystal Cave was a great cave, but it was pretty far off the main road. Floyd wanted to find a cave on the main road. It's all about location, location, location. So he was trying to find something that could maybe be a better location. And he crawls in, and a rock falls on his foot. He can't go forward or backwards. A lot of people kind of describe it as being in a limestone straitjacket. Or imagine stepping in a hole and there's a bear trap down there that just closes around your ankle and you can't pull yourself out. And his chest is against the wall, his back's against the wall. He can't really struggle and move. He can't get his hands down past his waist. He starts digging. And the more he digs, the more he's just crumbling more rocks down around his foot, and it's building up and burying his leg. Here's a photo of his family. What they decide to do is to dig a rescue shaft down to him. And dig the shaft deep enough to go over to the cave underneath where the rocks are holding him in. And get him out. He's way down there. So these are photos of the rescue shaft and the rescue workers digging these shafts, lowering people down. The person that was in charge of the rescue shaft, his name was Henry Carmichael. He was from Carock. and he was the superintendent of the Rock Asphalt Company. And so they had asked him to come over with his engineers and try to develop a way to rescue Floyd. So he brought his men, and they're working so hard that they're getting sick, they're getting tired. They would have to take breaks, so they would, try to get more volunteers and people to come help. But this went on for days. Days and days and days. It became a media circus. This is 1925, but they're bringing motion picture cameras. And there actually still exists today black and white film footage of the rescue effort and all of this. Also, you got radio. Radio's big time. It's the new thing back then. And so even Congress was taking recesses to get radio updates of this rescue effort that was going on in Kentucky. So this had grabbed the attention of the nation. And y'all could probably think of other news events like this. Do y'all remember a couple of years ago, there was a soccer team trapped in a cave in Thailand, and they were trying to rescue them? How many of you remember baby Jessica that fell in a whale? Yeah. So, it's stuff like this really grabs the attention because we can really empathize with, they need help. Here's an article here, and I'm just going to read kind of the bottom part of this. And it says, Collins, his father, and brothers are the owners of Crystal Cave, which is located near the cavern in which Collins is imprisoned. Sergeant Roselle says, a syndicate offered them $100,000 for the rights to develop this cave, which is considered by many as being a greater marvel than the famed Mammoth Cave. That they refused is typical of the entire family. He said, as their lives are obsessed with the thrilling and perilous exploration of the subterranean passages that run under the estate. Collins talks of little else but caves to acquaintances, but in his uncouth way was a devout religious man. So I like that because that gives us a kind of a glimpse of Floyd, of what type of man he was, and that he was obsessed with caving, but that he was a religious man, that he treated people fairly. Skeets Miller, that reporter, he would go into the cave and bring Floyd some food and try to dig him out, and after a while, Floyd would even tell Mr. Miller, he says, you got to go out and rest. You're too tired. He was thinking of others while this was going on. About a week goes into this, and it turns into what they call Carnival Sunday. They estimate 10,000 people had gathered. If you see this photo, you can see hamburger stands. You can see tents set up. Some of those were Red Cross tents. They weren't Red Cross tents to take care of Floyd. They were taking care of the crowds. But it became a circus. They said the road from Cave City to Mammoth Cave was bumper to bumper cars. They counted 40. One reporter said he counted 4,200 vehicles and 20 different states' license plates. And this is 1925. I don't know what the population of Glasgow was in 1925, but imagine almost a whole town, a whole city, out in the middle of the forest. I said this was a tragic end. They were not able to get to him in time. By the time the rescue shaft was completed, about 17 days had passed. Floyd is found dead in the cave. The rescue shaft is deemed very unsafe. It was dug really quickly, and so they wanted these people to get out of the cave, get out of that rescue shaft before it fell in and trapped more people. So they had a funeral and just left him there in the cave. That didn't sit well. Here's Floyd's, well, that didn't sit well with the brothers. They spent the next couple of months raising money. They hired some miners to reopen the rescue shaft and get their brother out of the cave. And that they did. That was the rock that was pinning his foot. That's all it was. If you read some of the newspaper reports, it talks about a 6-ton boulder pinning Floyd. It was actually 27 pounds. It just landed just perfectly and wedged in and wouldn't be moved. That's his lantern. Those are his shoes. So they buried Floyd next to the house and the ticket office right above the entrance to Crystal Cave. So they had a second funeral for him there. And this was in April 26, 1925. So a couple of months later. But he didn't stay there long. 2 years go by and a new guy buys the property and he digs Floyd's casket up and takes it down into Crystal Cave in that big room that we keep talking about, the Grand Canyon room, and puts Floyd on display, trying to advertise the cave business again and get people enticed to come see it. And it worked. Here's a photo of that Grand Canyon passageway, and I don't know if you can see back there, but there's his casket. 2 years go by that he's sitting in Crystal Cave, and one day they open up Crystal Cave and go down there, and the casket's empty. Floyd's gone. Somebody broke in the middle of the night and stole the body. And so there's this big search again for Floyd. And they finally find the body. He was tied up in a sack, and I guess it looked like they had maybe tried to toss him off into the Green River, but he got hung up in the bushes. And so they brought him back, put him in the cave again. This time they put chains around the casket so you couldn't open it anymore, but I guess we've been told, you know, it had some slack in it. Here's a photo of the casket with chains around it. Fast forward to about 1960. The owners finally agreed to sell the property to Mammoth Cave National Park. Mammoth Cave became a national park in 1941, but this was still a private business in the park. But eventually they agreed to sell their property in Crystal Cave, and the park just closes Crystal Cave. They don't want to show it, so it's kind of left vacant. But the story exploded with songs and books, and I guess y'all know there's a musical about Floyd Collins. If you didn't know, there's a musical about Floyd Collins. There is the death of Floyd Collins, or the Ballad of Floyd Collins, was recorded about a year after Floyd passed away. Vernon Dalhart records this ballad, and it's the first single record to sell 2 million copies in the United States. Now they're still making songs about Floyd. There's a Blackstone Cherry version about Floyd Collins. I'm sure y'all are familiar with them, heard of them. They got a song called The Ghost of Floyd Collins. Being that it's the 100th anniversary of when this happened, that musical that's been going on for decades, it's always been kind of something that universities would do, and I know it was in Chicago and Philadelphia. It even made it to the off-Broadway, but being that this is the 100th anniversary, it actually is on Broadway this year. So right here is one of the Advertisements for the Broadway musical next month, actually. It's going to be on Broadway. And again, it's going to be in Bowling Green, too, at the theater in Bowling Green here in a couple weeks. There was a monument built to Floyd in Horse Cave. It's not there anymore. It got torn down. I think it was too close to the road and people would crash into it. And so it's not there anymore, but there was even a monument to Floyd. There is the historical pedestrian trailway right out here next in Cave City, next to the Cave City Convention Center. There is a pedestrian walkway named after Floyd Collins. There was even a Floyd festival, Floyd Fest, that happened several years in a row in Horse Cave. This is the same grave marker that you saw pictures of in the cave. In 1989, the family was able to finally work with the Park Service, and they spent several days getting the casket and this headstone out of the cave. And in 1989, Floyd had his 5th funeral at the Mammoth Cave Baptist Church Cemetery, and that's where he's buried today. And this is from the cemetery here. Again, down at the bottom, it says he was trapped in the same cave. He got trapped January 30th, and then for the next 2 weeks in February, that rescue attempt. It also talks about him discovering Crystal Cave, and then at the end, greatest cave explorer ever known. So now that I've told that story, do you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Okay. I know a lot of great cave explorers. I've worked with a lot, and working at Mammoth Cave, you kind of have cavers from the Ukraine and from China and other countries come over, and we get to meet cavers from all over the world. And in my opinion, if I'm a musician, you think of the really good, successful ones. Well, if you work in caves, you've met kind of those Elvises of caves, cave explorers. So I've met some really great cavers. But there's not a Broadway musical about them. If they sing songs about them, they're not popular, like Floyd Collins. Books, songs. There's a movie based on Floyd Collins called Ace in the Hole. It stars Kirk Douglas. I believe it's an old black and white movie. Have y'all seen that? Okay. There's even a Simpsons episode based on Floyd Collins, where Bart gets a radio and he hides it in a whale, and he takes the other radio and he's tricking people, yelling, "Help, I've fallen and I'm trapped, my leg is stuck," and there's a media circus trying to get this kid out of the whale, and he's just in his room laughing at everybody. But it's all based on the media circus around Floyd Collins. So that's kind of my presentation for you. I do kind of want to say real quickly, Mammoth Cave National Park, as a national park, we want to protect the cave, protect the Green River Valley, protect the forest, protect the deer and the turkey and everything else. But really, before it was a national park, there were hundreds of families that lived there. This is just one of about 500 families that called that place home. And so part of our job is to not forget their stories. So, me and some of the other rangers, we're very passionate about remembering the Floyd Collins people, or the Stephen Bishops, or the B. Doyles and the Hunts and the Hansons and all these pre-park families. We hope to have a whole lot more opportunities to showcase different families each summer. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If you come into the visitor center and see an extra little display up every 2 or 3 months. We're going to try to rotate out and tell some of these other family stories as well. So, any questions about anything?
Do you think if this happened today, that we would have been able to get him out?
That was a question that was asked me a couple weeks ago. And we actually had a special cave tour that went into Crystal Cave. And this special group that went into Crystal Cave, someone asked that exact same question. And it just so happened one of the volunteers that was helping us with that is like head of the National Cave Rescue Organization. And he said he's pretty confident that if it happened today, with the equipment we got today, with all the training and knowledge, back then there was no such thing as a group of people that rescue people out of caves or confined spaces. And so now there's professionals that train to rescue people trapped in situations like this. So he's pretty confident that if it happened, in this day and time, absolutely. But it was 100 years ago. Anything else?
Is there anybody here that's related to him anyway?
You want me to call you out? Yeah, we got these two up here. Donnie Collins, his granddad is Marshall. Marshall was Floyd's brother. So Floyd is your great uncle, right? We've got his wife Carol here with us too. They've been with us a lot over the last couple of weeks, helping us with some stuff. And there's a lot of Collins relatives all over this area still today. All over Horse Cave and Munfordville and Smiths, right outside of Glasgow here. Yes.
I don't really have a question, but just since we're a historical group here, if nobody's read it before, there's a wonderful book called Trapped, written by Roger Brucker, who was a caver. And I revisited it a few years ago, and it's just really a marvelous piece of historical work. I mean, he interviewed, this was in the 70s, and he and a professional historian, they interviewed nearly everybody that was still alive at that, and there were quite a few. I knew people in Cave City that were involved in this. Johnny Gerald is a name you might be familiar with.
Yeah.
I remember Johnny Gerald. And at his first funeral, Stella Withers sang at his first funeral, and she was from Cave City. But it's a wonderful book. And Roger Brucker is going to be at this performance of the Floyd Collins musical in Bowling Green and speak after the performance.
He's 95.
He's 95 years old. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that right there is the only true book about it.
That book is from 1925, and it was written when it happened.
And Roger Brucker never saw to interview Marshall Collins or Ann Collins.
Well, that's a shame. There are some errors in that book, but he, as far as interviewing people, he interviewed a lot.
Yeah.
It's on the internet. You can read it on the
It's
internet.
got a PDF file.
No, I mean you may. It was only printed just 1 year. And
You could look for weeks to try to find that book.
They
You
gave
will not
that
find it
copy
for
to
sale
us.
anywhere.
At
They gave
Western
that to us
Kentucky
tonight.
University, they have a copy that you can
Roger
look
Brucker
at.
has a lot of inconsistencies in his book.
Well, a lot of the people he interviewed gave him a lot of false information.
I know.
There's, I'm not going to call names because I knew this gentleman too, but there's the story about Floyd, the story about Charles Lindbergh that you mentioned is true. Charles Lindbergh visited out there in 1921, but the story about Charles Lindbergh visiting Mammoth Cave in 1925 is false.
Right.
And he got that from a local man that he interviewed in Cave City who probably outlived everybody that could have refuted him. And Brucker ended up printing that story. And that story's gone on and on and on and on because it's a good story. But if you think about it, nobody knew who Charles Lindbergh was in 1925. Nobody knew who he was until 1927. When he made the transatlantic flight. So
Yeah, I don't think the stories about Floyd missing a leg is true either, from what we know now.
Yeah. But Brucker comes into it 50 years after it happened, and that, you know, it's,
Yes, sir.
I've always heard Lindbergh was flying news out of the back,
that's what has been
Flying the
said.
pictures, yeah.
so I have heard right.
Well, there's a,
No, he never did that.
he was a
He wasn't in
cadet.
this area at all.
He was only 25 years old at the time, and he was a cadet in San Antonio, I think it was San Antonio, at an Army. We didn't have an Air Force back then, but the Army had a flight school in San Antonio, and he's been, I think it's, you know, I'm speaking third hand here, but I was told that there's a dentist in Bowling Green that's a big Floyd collector, and that he visited even out there and found records that Lindbergh was at that location in 1925, nowhere around Sandgate.
What was happening was that media frenzy, everybody was competing to get the scoop. And so anybody was willing to write anything to get the next headline, to get the next scoop. So there was a lot of stuff being printed that just wasn't true.
Yeah.
I mean, one example was one reporter was taking a picture of some stray dog at the
Yeah.
entrance, and then he's writing that Floyd's dog can't wait for Floyd to come out of the cave, and they're like, that's not Floyd's dog, and he said, it will be tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're, you know,
Yeah.
So the last issue of the
Yeah.
Columbia magazine I got, I got stolen
Yeah.
up. I ran into a bomb
I appreciate you sharing. That's kind of
local
Proceed.
K-City. So you had a funeral home in Bowling Green. There was a big story there about Floyd Collins' body.
yes, sir.
I think it's interesting to know too, this is one of the three major events between the world wars.
Yeah,
Yeah. One of the three major events
which
between world wars.
another one of those major events was Lindbergh's
Yeah,
kid.
exactly,
being
yeah.
kidnapped.
And then the Great Depression, another.
Well, I don't want to take up. I don't want to
Thank
go
you
over.
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
excellent.
appreciate
Okay, thank you all for coming out this evening. Next month, we're doing something rather different because there's a scheduling conflict with this room. It's going to have, I think, a student art exhibit in it. So the Historical Society meeting is going to be over on the corner of the square at the Hive. They've not done anything quite like that, and the program is going to be focused on Arthur Kroc, grandson of the man who built that building, and of course who won 4 Pulitzer Prizes in journalism as his career in the newspaper world. So that will be over there as a special thing to do, and that'll be at 6 o'clock. So thank you all.
Have a good day.
For you too.